Morning buns. What are they? There's a debate. Cinnamon buns, cinnamon rolls, croissants, whatever. I think they're all of those things. So today we're gonna make morning buns that are the perfect marriage of all of your favorite breakfast pastries. And it's gonna be a choose your own adventure type recipe where I'll give you a lot of options for switch outs and you can customize it to whatever your favorite flavors and textures are.
Did you just black out? You alright?
The very first part that we're gonna be making for the recipe is the sponge. The sponge is very easy, only 3 ingredients. I'm gonna use whole milk, rye flour, and active dry yeast. You don't have to use rye flour. You can use any other whole wheat flour preferred, like just your normal store brand whole wheat flour or spelt flour. You can experiment with it as long as it's the kind of wheat. If you're gonna use all-purpose flour because you're not a big fan of whole wheat flours, you totally can. I would just recommend that you add a little bit more. I made this recipe for whole wheat. If you're gonna use AP, I would recommend using 1 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour. So we're just gonna go in with 2/3 cup of whole milk. That's about 170 grams. And then we're gonna make sure that it's at a lukewarm temperature, about 100 to 110 degrees. Take the lukewarm milk and just divide the packet of yeast into 2 stages. The first half of it is going into the sponge stage. And then we're gonna go in with a cup of rye flour or 1 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour. And I'm just gonna give it a very quick and gentle stir until everything's combined. We're not really trying to agitate it. It's actually a very loose batter. It's gonna look kind of like a cake batter, and that's okay. The gray comes from the rye flour. Rye has this very deep, rich, almost like tart aged flavor to it that I really, really like. So we're just gonna let this rest for 1 to 2 hours. If you want a more pure taste, 1 hour is fine, just until it doubles. And if you want a more of a tart, kind of like aged, almost sourdoughy feel to it, 2 hours is good. And just let it do its thing. In the past hour and a half, Chelsea has been teaching me how to properly say the word
Yeast.
and she said that your tongue has to vibrate a little,
Yeah.
like buzz a little. So yeast. God, it feels so wrong. Okay, an hour and a half later, we got this nice looking spongy thing. If you look at the bottom of the glass bowl, it's got nice porous structure to it. So we're gonna just use a stand mixer and dump in all the rest of our ingredients. And they are sponge, the remaining packet of your active dry yeast, 3/4 cup buttermilk, room temperature, 2 1/2 cups all-purpose flour, 1/4 cup of packed brown sugar, 2 teaspoons kosher salt, 1 large egg, room temperature, 2 tablespoons extra virgin olive oil, and we're going to be doing something weird with our butter. So this dough doesn't have to mix for very long. In fact, we don't really want to develop the gluten too much because we'll be rolling it later with the butter. Right now, I'm just going to scrape it down. It looks mostly cohesive, but there's still going to be some drier chunks in the bottom of your bowl and the sides, so I just want to make sure that we incorporate all of that. At this stage, your choose your own adventure ingredients are the buttermilk, as well as the olive oil, and possibly the brown sugar too. I've tested with white sugar. I can't really taste much of a difference, but I think the brown sugar lends the dough slightly more moistness. The buttermilk, I really like it because it has that tang to it, but you can also feel free to use evaporated milk. When I tested with evaporated milk, the dough is much more dense, but in a very pleasant, toothsome way. And then for the olive oil, I really, really recommend using an olive oil for flavor mostly. But if you're not a fan of olive oil, you can totally use 2 tablespoons butter in this case, softened, and that'll work just as fine. Maybe even better if you like butter. For right now, we're just gonna let the dough rest for 1 to 1.5 hours until it's doubled in size in the bowl. And then we'll make some of our other 6 ingredients. Sleep tight, my prince. So for my recipe, I'm using toasted almonds and toasted hazelnuts, a 2-to-1 ratio. I think hazelnuts are very delicious, rich, and oily, and almost too oily to use on their own. So I'm balancing them out with a little bit of a healthier, plainer taste. Still nutty, but just not as fatty from the almonds. I'm gonna toast them at 350 for about 10 to 12 minutes until you can smell them. That's the signal that lets you know your nuts are ready. Hazelnuts and almonds. You don't need to use the nuts that I like. You can definitely use pecans. You can also not use nuts if you're not into nuts. So choose your own adventure. In the meantime, we will be making rum raisins. Not a fan of raisins? You might want to give these a chance because I've changed 2 people's minds about raisins and baked goods since giving them a taste of these morning buns. We're just gonna be putting in a cup of raisins in with an ounce of rum. I love rum. 1 teaspoon vanilla extract and about ½ cup of water, and we're just gonna let it simmer until most of the liquid is absorbed by the raisins. So one of the best piece of advice that I've ever gotten from a chef is that you have to use all senses when you're cooking and baking. And right now, I'm hearing that the liquid is running dry. It's a very different kind of bubbly sound. And when I lift up the pan, maybe like you can see a tablespoon or a little bit more than a tablespoon of liquid. And I can see that all the ridges on the raisins are hydrated for the most part, and there's no real whiteness visible anymore. That's about ready. Once we turn off the heat, the liquid will get absorbed into the rest of the raisins as they cool. And so you don't want to cook it until it's completely dry right now. You want to make sure that you have a little bit of liquid left in the pot so that the raisins still have something to soak up in the next 10 to 20 minutes once they cool. Oh yeah, toasty. So you can see that the skins are about to peel off. They're ready. So we're gonna pull them and rest them until they're cool enough to handle. And then if you're like me, you're probably not a huge fan of the skins on these hazelnuts. So we're gonna let them cool, and then we're gonna do a cool trick to get the skins off of them. My trick is to grab a jar, and then I'm just gonna funnel these nuts in to the jar. I'm just gonna close the jar and shake it. And then I'm just gonna keep shaking it until all the skins are off and the nuts are naked. Shouldn't take more than a minute. And then we'll just dump it back out. And I'm just gonna kind of sift it with my hands so that all the skins fall through my fingers. Almonds, I just leave them. I think they're fine with their skins on. So the raisins are cooled now, and you can see that all the liquid has basically been absorbed. There's really no drainage anymore. So we're just gonna pop it out of the pot, put it in a bowl, set it aside to chill completely for when we're ready to roll. Right now, we are plopping this dough into this clean bowl so that I can see what my total weight of the dough is to make sure that I get a clean divide in half of the dough. So it is about 930 grams, which is 465 grams of dough per half. My hands are starting to get messy, but you know, it's part of the game. Oh, right now you can taste it. Tastes pretty good. Once you have wet hands, you don't need to dry them because wet hands will actually help you in this part. So what we're gonna do is wrap these into squares for a cold proof. This will make sure that the dough gets extra chilled and nice to work with. So because the dough is so wet and sticky, I'm just gonna drizzle it with a little more olive oil and then smear it so that the plastic itself does not stick to the dough. So scrape it in to the plastic. And then, because the dough is so sticky and you don't want to touch it too much, I'm just going to use the plastic wrap to fold over and fold over into a squarish type shape. And then seal off the sides, still maintaining that square, and seal it again. This will proof in the fridge, and you won't believe how much it proofs. It will explode, believe me. So we're gonna go ahead and double wrap it so that it can't escape. We definitely want to keep it in the square shape because this will make it so much easier for you to roll out in the next stage. We're gonna chill them for 2 to 4 hours until they're completely cool. It totally depends on how cold your fridge is. I would recommend you leave these overnight actually. That way they can hydrate a little bit more. But if you're short on time, I would recommend 2 to 4 hours at least. I formulated this recipe to use only 2 sticks of butter total. Because, I don't know guys, the holidays have been hitting me really hard and I don't think that it's necessary to use more than 2 sticks of butter per recipe. But if you want to fight my decision on it, as I said, feel free. We're gonna save 4 tablespoons of butter for a later installment in our brushing syrup. And then with the remaining 1.5 sticks, we're going to slice them into very, very thin pieces. This will help us laminate the dough. So 6 tablespoons per batch because we divided the dough in half, so 6 tablespoons are gonna go into each. As fine as you can go, and no, they don't have to be perfect. And I don't want your morning buns to come out of a place of anxiety. So we're just gonna pop these slices back in the fridge and wait until our dough is ready to roll out, and then we'll take them out at the same time so that the dough and the butter are roughly the same texture so that they can marry together perfectly. We're working with 1 piece of dough and 1 portion of the butter at a time because we don't want anything to get too soft. Our goal here is to work very fast as we can, to get lamination done so that we don't interfere with the butter melting into the dough. If it sticks, do not worry. If it creates holes, not ideal, but do not worry. We will carry forth. I don't want you to do it too thin because that makes the dough more likely to tear. And now we're just going to take the butter and try to layer it out evenly across the bottom 2/3 of the dough. We're gonna be doing a letter fold with this. If your butter is still too thick, you can give it a little tiny smush so that it won't tear through the dough too much. And then once you get to the end, you can see which spots need a little bit more butter and just fill in the blanks as well as you can. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, once they're all in, just press gently so that the butter sticks to your portion of the dough. And then we're gonna lift the top layer without the butter and pull it over the bottom. And then fold the bottom layer up to meet the middle portion of the letter fold, like so. And then we're gonna seal the edges, just like this, so that the butter doesn't gush out because we're about to give it a couple of turns. So we're gonna flour it again because it's kind of sticky on the bottom. And now we're gonna flatten all across. And then we're going to do the letter fold again. So top third down to meet the middle, brushing off the excess flour just a little bit. Bottom third up and over. And then we're gonna do this one last time. And do you see the chunks of butter in here? That's good. We wanna keep the chunks of butter. It's kind of like pie dough on a bigger scale. Final fold. By now the dough is like very soft, and that's a sign for us to stop working with it. So that's as many layers as I want to go. If you want that extra layer, you can go ahead and without rolling it out because it's already so soft, just tuck the dough in into another letter fold. And then this is the way we're gonna chill it. How's that for an adventure? So we're gonna be doing the filling for both batches of dough. 100 grams of hazelnuts and 200 grams of our almonds. And we're looking for a pretty fine consistency. So it's going to look like this texture. You have some bigger chunks and a lot of really finely ground chunks and some powdery bits, and combine it with 3/4 cup packed brown sugar. PSA, when using citrus zests, be sure to wash your fruits really, really well. Zest of 2 oranges, zest of 2 lemons. We're going to smoosh it with our fingers to make sure that all of the zest oils are released into the sugar. We're just gonna give all of this a mix. So we got the nuts, the citrus, the sugar, the cinnamon, the salt, and this is gonna be our delicious nutty filling. We're gonna make our brushing butter. That's gonna make all of our delicious nutty fillings stick to the dough. So over medium heat, we're gonna go in with 2 tablespoons of bourbon whiskey. And we're gonna go in with 1/4 cup of maple syrup. And then the remaining 4 tablespoons of butter from earlier. Medium heat, let it come up to simmer. We're not really trying to make like a thickened syrup because that'll make it really hard to spread on the dough. We're just gonna let it melt, jive together for a minute or so, and then let it cool a little bit before brushing it onto our dough. Right around here is what we're looking at. So the foam is just starting to disappear and the bubbles are getting slightly bigger. When I do the swirl, no more foam, we're set. Take it off the heat and just let it cool. And then we're ready to assemble our buns. Let's assemble. Flour your surface. Unwrap your laminated dough. So this dough I had chilled overnight. If you're on a time crunch, again, 2 to 4 hours. The longer the better because that gives the butter time to set up again and the flour to like really, really relax the gluten. If you don't let it chill for enough time, it will get really hard to roll and to cut. So you really want to give it the appropriate amount of time. As you're rolling, you'll see that our butter pockets will start to flatten a little bit, and that's exactly what we want. We want the butter to get as thin a layer as possible. We want this to be about 1/4 inch thick and 12 inches wide. We're gonna be cutting each half dough into 8 pieces of rolls. Want to make sure that it's not sticking on the bottom because you don't want your dough to be sticky as you're rolling. Surefire way to lose your filling if it sticks. So this is half of the butter mixture that we made. So you can brush it on, or I like to just pour it a little and use a spatula. It's a little bit faster this way. You just want to get to all the corners. And once that is on, we're gonna go in with the nuts and the raisins. It's gonna seem like a lot of filling, and it is, and we want all of it to stick. So I just pile it on, and then I use my hands and just smooth it out into an even layer. And once it's all across, I like to use my hands, and like we did with the butter earlier, just make sure that you're pressing it in a little bit. And then, again, if you're not a fan of raisins, feel free to skip, but I would recommend trying it out. Now we're gonna roll. We're gonna start with the far side, and then we're gonna try to make as tight a roll as possible. So the beginning part is the most important. You wanna make sure it's all lined up and even. Tuck, tuck, tuck. And then as your roll is getting larger, you can like lift the dough up a little bit and then tuck it back in to make sure you have the tightest roll. Lift and tuck, lift and tuck. I like to hold it by the ends to make sure that the filling isn't spilling out of the ends, and then kind of using the length of your hands to just really get all of it to come together. Then once you reach the end, measure it. Chances are it's wider than the 12 inches you started out with, so I just like to use my hands to squish it a little, compact it, make sure it's about 12, that way you get nice fat rolls. And then you're gonna grab a sharp knife and a muffin pan. I like to go on the edges because they get the most color. So each roll is gonna be about 1.5 inches. I just like to go down the middle, then go down the middle of those, and then go down the middle of those. Then we're just going to rest them into your sprayed cups. Tuck them in, nestle them. And cover them loosely and let them rest until they're nice and fluffy. It usually takes me about 1.5 hours to 2 hours because the dough is so cold. So leave it in a nice warm part of your kitchen. And be patient. Oh, and preheat your oven. 375 degrees so that it's nice and ready. It's only been 1 hour, but it's super hot in our kitchen today, and I honestly feel like we're ready to bake. I push and it doesn't really fully bounce back. And you can see how the thickness of the rolls have basically doubled, and they look very full and fat and ready to get cooked. So I think we're gonna do that. I think we're gonna cook them. Our oven is preheated to 375, and we will be tossing these in a cinnamon sugar mixture. One option for this recipe is after you make the cinnamon sugar, you can actually just dust the tops of these a little bit for that extra crunchy sugar top. If you decide to go ahead with this, we're just gonna make the cinnamon sugar now. 100 grams of granulated sugar plus a teaspoon of cinnamon. And then you can just give it a shake, let it combine. I'm just gonna do 1 tray with the sugar and 1 tray without the sugar. You know, a little option's nice, a little difference. So I'm just gonna pop them in. Oh, and before I forget, I highly, highly, highly recommend popping a tray underneath your trays here. Sometimes the butter oozes out and it makes the bottom of your oven burn, and you really don't want that smoke all over your house. So get a tray for safety. And then we're gonna put on a timer for 25 minutes and check back. Hello, welcome back. We're onto the very last portion of our morning bun assembly. I am making a coffee glaze. Optional, but I think it really is the cherry on top of the sundae. And it's very simple. If you have some leftover brewed coffee, we're gonna take some coffee, put it in here with some confectioner's sugar, put it in here with some instant coffee, and some condensed sweetened milk. It's a super simple glaze. It takes a minute, maybe 2 if you have everything pulled out, and it's delightful. I'm adding a teaspoon of instant coffee in there just to pump up the coffee flavor a little bit. If you only use the brewed coffee, you can still get this glaze. It just won't be as punchy. A little bitter with the sweet makes everything taste balanced. Dun, 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 dun. Waiting on the last minute. I'm so excited. I smell them already, so I think they're gonna be really golden brown and delicious. So let's just take a peek. I think the top tray is ready though. So I'm gonna pull the top tray.
Cute, it's so fluffy.
And then I'm gonna move the bottom tray up to the top because that's clearly the better spot to be in. And then I'm gonna set a timer for 3 more minutes while that gets golden. We're gonna let these cool for about 5 minutes before they're cool enough to handle, and then we'll toss them in the sugar and glaze them with the coffee glaze. You see a difference in the color here? This is the batch that we put cinnamon sugar on top of, and you can see that the sugar is still there, and it's like created this very crunchy crust, and it's definitely helped to brown the tops a little bit because the sugar caramelizes and raises the temperature a lot. These are blonder and not quite as crispy. Even the outside ones that got enough heat exposure aren't as crispy. They're baked, they're just very soft. And I kind of like having this difference in texture, especially if you're feeding a crowd. Some people like it to be crunchier and more golden, and some people, like me, like it to be softer and, oh my God, it's so soft. Chelsea, it's so soft. Okay, while these are warm, we're just gonna toss them in cinnamon sugar. Be gentle because they are still quite soft and fragile. But we got our morning buns, folks. Oh my God, it's so soft. It's like crunchy on the outside and super moist and soft and
Did you just black out? You alright?
This is so comforting to wake up to, I think. All your hard work has paid off. And there is no more satisfying feeling on earth than to feel like what you've done is worth it. So let me know in the comments below if you guys have ever had a morning bun, if you love them, if you feel ed about them. Let me know if you made these, and I don't know, just let me know what you think, because I want to know what you think. Chelsea, you want one?
What choice?